The vast chamber stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls catching and reflecting the light from 1,000 different suns. Representatives from 47 different alien species filled the tiered seating, their diverse forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have amazed any human seeing it for the first time. Some delegates breathed methane through elaborate masks, while others sat in pools of liquid that kept their aquatic bodies comfortable. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert hundreds of different languages into something everyone could understand. At the center of this magnificent space stood a podium carved from a single piece of transparent crystal. Ambassador Krell approached it with the slow, measured steps of someone who knew the weight of history rested on his shoulders. His species, the Thargonians, were tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their elongated heads. His ceremonial robes, woven with threads that shifted color as he moved, marked him as a speaker for the coalition. Krell had prepared for this moment for months. Every word had been carefully chosen, every pause calculated for maximum effect. The coalition had spent years building their case against humanity, documenting every perceived violation, every act they considered aggressive or inappropriate. Today would mark the end of what many considered an experiment that had gone terribly wrong. The chamber gradually fell quiet as Krell raised his primary hand. Even the constant chittering from the insect-like Vex delegation died down to barely audible clicks. The moment had arrived. His voice, when it came, was deep and resonant, carrying easily through the vast space even before the amplification systems caught it. Each word was pronounced with the careful precision of a trained orator who had spent decades learning how to command attention from diverse audiences. The peace treaty he mentioned was legendary throughout the galaxy. For 1,000 standard years, not a single major conflict had erupted between member species. Trade flowed freely along established routes. Diplomatic disputes were settled through negotiation rather than violence. It was an achievement that previous generations had thought impossible, given the violent histories of most spacefaring species. But that peace, according to Krell and the Coalition, was now in danger. The human section of the chamber was easy to spot, not because of any dramatic differences in appearance, but because of their remarkable uniformity. 20 men and women in simple black business suits, sitting quietly with their hands folded. They looked almost boring compared to the exotic alien delegates surrounding them. Their leader, Ambassador David Miller, was a man who had seen better days. His hair was more gray than brown now, and lines around his eyes spoke of years spent squinting at diplomatic documents and star charts. As Krell listed the charges against humanity, the other alien delegates leaned forward in their seats. The accusations were serious ones in their culture. Aggressive terraforming meant changing entire worlds to suit human needs without regard for existing life forms. Industrial pollution on a system-wide scale suggested a species that cared nothing for the environment, and military exercises that grew bolder each year hinted at preparations for something the galaxy had not seen in a millennium. The formal declaration of war came with all the ceremonial weight that Krell could muster. His voice rose to fill every corner of the chamber, and his 4 eyes swept across the assembled delegates as if personally delivering the message to each one. This was supposed to be the moment when the accused species begged for mercy, when they promised to change their ways, when they acknowledged the wisdom of their betters. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. It started small. Ambassador Miller made a sound that might have been a cough, but somehow did not sound quite right. His shoulders began to shake slightly, and he raised one hand to cover his mouth. The woman sitting next to him, Lisa Carter, seemed to be having similar problems. Her attempt to remain dignified was failing as her lips twitched upward at the corners. Within seconds, the quiet sounds became unmistakable. Laughter, real, genuine, uncontrolled laughter, was echoing from the human section. Robert Hayes, a younger man with dark hair, was shaking his head back and forth as if he had just heard the funniest joke of his life. The woman on his left was actually giggling, a sound that seemed impossibly cheerful in the solemn chamber. The laughter spread through the human delegation like wildfire. Soon all 20 representatives were laughing with the kind of deep, hearty amusement that people show when they cannot help themselves. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were holding their sides as if their stomachs hurt from laughing so hard. The alien delegates sat in stunned silence. In all the centuries of galactic diplomacy, nothing like this had ever happened. War declarations were serious business, matters of life and death for entire species. The proper response was fear, or anger, or desperate pleas for negotiation. Laughter was not even on the list of possibilities. Ambassador Krell stood frozen at his podium, his carefully prepared speech completely forgotten. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep confusion among his people. The ceremonial weight of the moment had completely evaporated, replaced by something no one in the chamber understood. Finally, Miller managed to control himself enough to stand up, though he was still chuckling as he wiped tears from his eyes. The great chamber had emptied quickly after the laughter died down. Alien delegates rushed from their seats in confusion and fear, their translation devices buzzing with rapid conversations in dozens of languages. Some species had never heard human laughter before, and the sound had frightened them more than any war cry could have. Others recognized it but could not understand why anyone would laugh at a declaration of war. Ambassador Miller walked slowly through the corridors of the human diplomatic vessel, his footsteps echoing softly on the metal floors. The ship was called Peaceful Intent, a name that had seemed appropriate when it was built 50 years ago. Now, he wondered if the aliens would finally understand the deeper meaning behind that choice of words. The ship was peaceful in the same way that a sleeping tiger was peaceful. His quarters were simple and comfortable, decorated with images of Earth and the human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Through the large viewport, he could see the colorful clouds of the Andromeda Nebula swirling in slow motion, painted in shades of blue and purple that no human artist could have imagined. He had been looking at those same clouds for 3 days while the Coalition prepared their war declaration. 3 days to think about everything that had led to this moment. Commander Jennifer Walsh found him there, staring out at the stars with tired eyes. She was a capable woman in her 30s, who had served as his assistant for the past 5 years. Her military background showed in the way she carried herself. Straight and confident, even in the face of what most people would consider a crisis. She carried a secure tablet that glowed softly with encrypted messages from Earth and the human colonies. She spoke quietly, as if she were afraid the walls might be listening. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, the most senior military leaders in human space, were asking for permission to activate Protocol 7. Miller knew what that meant. Protocol 7 was the plan they had hoped never to use, the one that would show the galaxy exactly what humanity had been doing during the long centuries of peace. Miller turned away from the viewport and looked at his assistant. Jennifer had been born during the peace years, in a time when most humans had never seen war except in history books and old movies. She understood the theory of what her species was capable of, but she had never lived through the reality of it. None of the younger generation had. That was both a blessing and a potential weakness. He told her that the aliens would learn soon enough why the humans had been laughing. There was no need to explain it to them directly. They would understand when they saw what happened next. Miller had spent decades in diplomatic service, and he knew that some lessons could only be learned through experience. The computer system responded to his voice command, activating a holographic display in the center of the room. The projection showed a 3-dimensional image of Earth as it had appeared over 800 years ago, when the first alien scout ships had detected human radio signals and decided to investigate. What they had found was not the peaceful civilization they had hoped to encounter. Earth in 2001-57 was a world at war with itself. The Third World War had been raging for 6 years, and the damage was visible even from space. Huge areas of the planet glowed with the aftermath of nuclear exchanges. The atmosphere was thick with smoke and radiation. Entire continents were burning. The alien scouts sent back reports that horrified the Galactic Council. Here was a species that possessed advanced technology, including weapons capable of destroying their own planet. But they seemed determined to use that technology for nothing but violence. Worse, the intercepted human communications suggested that they were developing even more terrible weapons, including biological agents that could wipe out all life on a world. The Council had faced a difficult decision. They could leave humanity alone and hope the species would destroy itself before it developed space travel. They could try to help and risk contaminating their peaceful galaxy with human violence. Or they could intervene directly and force humanity to change its ways. They chose intervention. 6 months after the first scout reports, a massive alien fleet appeared in Earth's solar system. The ships were enormous, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. They came armed with weapons that could turn planets into dust and shields that could deflect any attack humans might attempt. The ultimatum they delivered was simple and non-negotiable. Humanity would accept strict limitations on their expansion into space and their military development, or the alien fleet would ensure that humans never left their home system again. The threat was clear, even though it was delivered in diplomatic language. Accept our rules, or be destroyed. Miller watched as the holographic display showed the signing of the Treaty of Stellar Harmony, human representatives putting their names to a document that would shape the next 1,000 years of galactic history. To the aliens, it looked like grateful compliance, a savage species accepting the wisdom of their betters and agreeing to be civilized. Jennifer watched the images with fascination. She had studied this history in school, but seeing the actual footage was different. The human negotiators looked defeated, their faces showing the exhaustion of people who had been fighting a losing war for years. They signed the treaty with the slow movements of people who had no other choice. Miller explained what the aliens had never understood. The humans had not been defeated. They had been buying time. The bridge of the Terran Resolve hummed with quiet efficiency as Admiral Patricia Reynolds watched the approaching enemy fleet through the main view screen. She was a woman in her late 40s who had spent most of her career preparing for a day she had hoped would never come. Her gray uniform was perfectly pressed, and her short brown hair was pulled back in a style that was both professional and practical. Around her, the bridge crew went about their duties with the calm competence of people who had trained for this moment their entire lives. The alien fleet was an impressive sight by any measure. 1,200 warships moved through space, in perfect formation, their hulls painted with bright colors and ceremonial markings that told the story of their glorious mission. The ships came in dozens of different designs, reflecting the diverse species that made up the coalition. Some were long and sleek like metal arrows, while others were round and bulky like floating fortresses. All of them bristled with weapons that glowed with barely contained energy. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell sat at the tactical station, his fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed the positions and capabilities of every ship in both fleets. He was a young man with sandy hair and sharp eyes who had graduated at the top of his class from the Naval Academy. His voice was steady as he reported what his sensors were telling him. The enemy fleet was not even trying to hide their approach. Their ships moved in standard attack formations that any first-year military student could recognize. Their engines blazed at full power, sending out energy signatures that could be detected from light years away. Their weapons were charging openly, making no attempt to disguise their intentions. To Mitchell, it looked like they were more interested in putting on a show than fighting a battle. Admiral Reynolds nodded at his report, but she was not surprised. The coalition had not fought a real war in over 1,000 years. Their military leaders had learned their tactics from history books and training simulations. They had never faced an enemy that might actually fight back with deadly intent. To them, this was indeed more like a parade than a battle. They expected the humans to surrender as soon as they saw the size of the approaching fleet. The orbital platforms scattered throughout. The star system looked completely harmless to enemy scanners. They appeared to be simple mining stations, the kind that had been extracting minerals from asteroids in this region for decades. The coalition had seen them countless times during routine patrols, and had never given them a second thought. Each platform was roughly cylindrical in shape, about the size of a small city, with what looked like industrial equipment covering their surfaces. What the alien scanners could not detect was the true nature of that equipment. The machines that appeared to be, or processors, were actually point defense systems, capable of tracking and destroying thousands of targets simultaneously. The heating elements that kept the stations warm were actually energy weapons powerful enough to cut through the strongest armor. The power cores that seemed to be running at minimal levels were actually operating in stealth mode, ready to unleash enough energy to power a small planet. Communications. Officer Susan Brooks was a woman with red hair and freckles who looked younger than her 30 years. She had been monitoring alien communications for hours, listening to their commanders coordinate their attack with all the subtlety of children playing war games. When the enemy flagship began transmitting, her voice carried a note of barely controlled amusement. The main view screen filled with the image of Admiral Deckmer, the coalition fleet commander. He was a member of the reptilian species, with green scales covering his face and neck. Ritual scars marked his achievements in previous campaigns, though those campaigns had been against pirates and smugglers, rather than organized military forces. His throat sacs inflated and deflated as he spoke, a sign of excitement among his people. His demand for surrender was delivered with all the authority he could muster. In his mind, this was the moment when the savage humans would realize the futility of resistance and beg for mercy. He had practiced this speech for weeks, imagining how it would sound when it was played back in the history recordings that would commemorate this great victory. Admiral Reynolds straightened her uniform and looked directly into the camera. Her response was calm and professional, delivered in the tone of voice that teachers use when trying to prevent students from making a serious mistake. She genuinely did not want to hurt the alien fleet, not because she was afraid of them, but because she understood what would happen if they forced her to defend herself. The alien commander's reaction was exactly what she had expected. His throat sacs swelled with indignation at the suggestion that his mighty fleet could be hurt by what appeared to be a handful of human border patrol ships. In his arrogance, he could not imagine that the humans might have capabilities he had never seen before. Mitchell's voice cut through the tension on the bridge as he reported that the enemy fleet was beginning their attack run. 1,200 ships were moving into firing positions, their weapons reaching full charge. The moment of truth had finally arrived. Reynolds gave the order that would change galactic history. The mining platforms throughout the system suddenly came alive with purpose. The news traveled faster than light itself through the galaxy's vast communication networks. On 1,000 different worlds, in languages that ranged from musical tones to complex chemical signals, the same impossible story was being told and retold. The mighty coalition fleet, 1,200 of the most advanced warships in known space, had been destroyed by what appeared to be a handful of human border patrol vessels and some mining equipment. Supreme Commander Grultok sat alone in his private chambers aboard the massive command station that orbited the coalition capital world. His species, the hexapods, were known throughout the galaxy for their calm, analytical minds and their ability to process multiple streams of information simultaneously. His 6 arms could operate different control systems at the same time, while his large compound eyes tracked dozens of data streams across multiple displays. But tonight, all 6 of his limbs were shaking uncontrollably as he watched the battle. recordings for what felt like the 100th time. The tactical data made no sense. According to every military doctrine he had studied, the battle should have been over in minutes, with a complete coalition victory. Instead, he was looking at the destruction of 400 of his best ships, while the human forces had not lost a single vessel. The most disturbing part was not even the battle itself, but what had happened afterward. As the coalition fleet retreated in confusion and panic, something had emerged from what they had thought was an empty asteroid field. It was a ship unlike anything in any database, massive beyond belief, and clearly designed for industrial purposes. The humans called it a factory ship, and it had immediately begun consuming nearby asteroids and turning the raw materials into new warships. His military analysts had been working around the clock to understand what they had witnessed, but their reports only made the situation more frightening. The factory ship was producing completed vessels at a rate that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Asteroids went in one end, and fully functional warships came out the other, all within a matter of hours rather than the months or years that normal shipbuilding required. His aide, a nervous young hexapod named Crystal, approached his desk with the careful movements of someone who was afraid of being shot for bringing bad news. The aide's voice was barely above a whisper as he announced that the humans were broadcasting a message on all galactic communication frequencies. The holographic display in the center of the room activated automatically, showing the familiar face of Ambassador David Miller. But something was different about the human diplomat now. Gone was the amused expression he had worn during the war declaration. In its place was something much more serious, the look of someone who was genuinely disappointed in the way events had unfolded. The background behind Miller appeared to be a simple conference room, with metal walls and basic furniture. To most viewers, it looked like the kind of place where minor administrative meetings might be held. But experienced military officers throughout the galaxy recognized the distinctive design elements. This was not an office or a meeting room. This was the command briefing center of a dreadnought-class warship, the kind of vessel that could destroy entire fleets, single-handedly. Miller's voice was calm and measured as he addressed the entire galaxy. He explained that the laughter from the human delegation had not been meant as an insult. Instead, it had been genuine confusion at the aliens' approach to declaring war. The humans had tried to warn the coalition that they were making a terrible mistake. But those warnings had been ignored. The display changed to show archived footage that made every military commander in the galaxy sit up in shock. These were recordings of human military exercises from the peace years. Massive fleet formations moving through space with a precision and coordination that made the coalition's tactics look like the work of children playing with toys. The ships in the recordings moved in perfect synchronization, thousands of vessels acting as a single organism. Their maneuvers were so complex and so perfectly executed that it was clear they represented a level of military sophistication that the galaxy had never seen before. Energy beams crisscrossed space in patterns that created temporary barriers and defensive zones. Ships appeared and disappeared from sensor detection, as if they could make themselves invisible at will. Miller continued his explanation, telling the galaxy that human children learned about warfare only as ancient history, something their species had outgrown centuries ago. But despite this peaceful education, every human still carried the genetic and cultural memory of what their species had once been capable of. They had hoped that the galaxy would choose to reform its government to treat all species as equals, rather than forcing a confrontation. General Michael Porter appeared beside Miller, and his presence sent another wave of shock through military observers across the galaxy. His uniform was covered with decorations and ribbons that represented conflicts and campaigns that no alien database contained any record of. Some of the medals appeared to be made from materials that did not exist in any known periodic table. Porter's explanation was delivered in the flat, matter-of-fact tone that career military officers use when discussing technical details. The battle that had just destroyed a third of the Coalition's fleet had involved only a training squadron and some automated defense platforms. These were not even frontline military units, just the equivalent of local police and security systems. The general's next words sent ice through the veins of every military commander listening. If the Coalition chose to continue the war, humanity would provide coordinates where they could find the actual human military forces. The final Coalition fleet burst out of hyperspace with engines blazing and weapons ready for what they believed would be the decisive battle of the war. Admiral Cathrak commanded this force of 800 ships, the largest military formation the galaxy had seen in centuries. His orders were simple: find the human military headquarters and destroy it completely. The coordinates provided by the humans had led them to what sensors indicated was a star system with unusual energy readings. What they found waiting for them made every alien crew member stare in stunned silence at their view screens. A massive ring of metal and crystal stretched around the entire star, forming a complete circle that was wider than most planets and thick enough to hold entire continents. The structure caught and reflected the star's light in patterns that created rainbow effects across its surface. Cities dotted the ring like jewels, their lights twinkling in organized patterns that suggested populations in the millions. Shipyards, larger than space stations, hung from the ring's inner surface, and from them came the steady stream of vessels being constructed. Admiral Frank Morrison stood in the observation lounge of the Academy Command Center, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands as he watched the alien fleet try to understand what they were seeing. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and calm blue eyes that had seen more battles than he cared to remember. Behind him, the sounds of normal academy life continued: instructors teaching classes, cadets hurrying to their next lessons, and the constant hum of a facility that never slept. Colonel Sarah Mitchell joined him at the massive viewport, carrying a datapad filled with reports from across human space. She was a woman in her 40s, with short black hair and the bearing of someone who had spent her career managing complex military operations. Her uniform was crisp and professional, marked with ribbons that showed service in conflicts most of the galaxy had never heard of. Morrison asked her about the status of other installations, and her answer revealed the true scope of what humanity had built during the long peace. 47 ring worlds were now fully operational, each one a combination of military base, industrial center, and training academy. The factory systems she mentioned were producing ships and equipment at rates that would have seemed impossible. 2 alien engineers. Below them, in the academy training areas, young cadets went through their daily routines. Tommy Anderson was a 20-year-old from the agricultural world of New Kansas. Tall and blonde, with the easy smile of someone who had grown up thinking the galaxy was a peaceful place. Rebecca Wilson came from the industrial colony of Forge Prime, a serious young woman with dark hair who excelled at tactical studies and engineering problems. These students represented a generation that had never seen war, but their training was thorough and intense. They learned about ship operations, weapons systems, strategic planning, and the psychology of conflict. More importantly, they learned about responsibility and the weight of decisions that could affect millions of lives. Their instructors were veterans who remembered the old days, men and women who understood that the price of peace was constant preparation for war. Admiral Cathrak finally managed to find his voice and transmitted an emergency message to the human installation. His species was known for their logical minds and careful planning, but what he was seeing challenged everything he thought he knew about military engineering and industrial capacity. The ring world was clearly artificial, built by intelligent design rather than natural processes. But the scale of construction involved was beyond anything his people had ever attempted. Morrison activated the communication system and responded with the calm tone that experienced officers use when dealing with confused subordinates. He identified the installation as the Terra Military Academy and explained that what the aliens we're seeing represented only a small fraction of humanity's actual defensive capabilities. The alien admiral's response was exactly what Morrison had expected. The intelligence reports that had guided coalition strategy were based on observations of human border forces and civilian colonies. No alien scout had ever penetrated deep enough into human space to discover installations like this one. The coalition had been planning their war based on incomplete and misleading information. Morrison's explanation was delivered with the patience of a teacher addressing students who had missed an important lesson. During the 1,000 years of enforced peace, humanity had not been sitting idle. They had built 47 installations, like this one, throughout their territory, each one capable of housing and supporting military forces larger than most alien civilizations could field. The defensive systems he mentioned were based on technologies that had been developed in secret, hidden from alien observation by careful planning and misdirection. The silence that followed Morrison's explanation stretched for several minutes as the alien fleet tried to process what they had learned. When Admiral Kethrek finally spoke again, his voice carried the weight of complete defeat. The surrender was unconditional, immediate, and total. 3 months later, the galaxy had been transformed in ways that few could have imagined. Ambassador Miller stood before the newly formed Galactic Democratic Assembly, addressing representatives from every known species. The old system of government, where a few powerful species made decisions for everyone else, had been replaced by something more fair and representative. The assembly hall itself was a symbol of the new order. Instead of the crystal chamber, where species sat in ranked tiers based on their political power, this room had simple seats arranged in a circle, where every delegate was equal. The voting system was based on population and contribution, rather than military strength or historical privilege. Miller's speech to the reformed galaxy was both an explanation and a promise.